Tonight, we're going to explore what life on Mars would really be like. Elon Musk plans to put humans on Mars by 2030. In most visions, the difficult part is getting there. The rockets land, the doors open, and humanity begins turning a red desert into a second home. But arrival would be the easy part. The real challenge would begin the first morning after landing, when Mars stops being a destination and becomes the place where ordinary life has to happen. Its atmosphere has less than 1% of Earth's surface pressure and is made almost entirely of carbon dioxide. Gravity pulls with only 38% of the force your body evolved under. Radiation reaches the ground with no global magnetic field to turn it away. A home on Mars would be less like a building and more like a sealed machine holding a tiny piece of Earth together. Outside, even a short walk would require a suit and an airlock. Inside, oxygen, water, pressure, temperature, and power would have to be controlled without interruption. Over time, bodies would adapt to weaker gravity. Families would live through delayed conversations. Children born there might grow into adults shaped for Mars rather than Earth. Mars would not simply change where humans live, it could change what living means, and eventually what kind of humans live there. By the end of tonight, you're going to understand how Martian time, gravity, radiation, isolation, and dependence on machinery would reshape daily life, and why the first people born on Mars may see Earth not as home, but as another planet. Before we get started, if you love exploring the depths of space as much as we do, take a second to like the video or subscribe. It's a simple action, but it helps this channel reach more curious minds like yours. Now, let's begin. The first ordinary thing Mars changes is your clock. A Martian solar day, known as a sol, lasts about 24 hours and 39 minutes. 40 extra minutes sounds insignificant, but Mars adds them to every day, and the difference never stops accumulating. After 7 sols, a Mars-based schedule has shifted by roughly 4.5 hours against Earth time. After 30, the two schedules are almost 20 hours apart. Your body may eventually adapt to the longer cycle. The rest of your life on Earth does not. You have 2 choices, and neither keeps both worlds aligned. Continue following Earth time, and the hours on your clock gradually separate from the daylight outside. A display that says noon eventually points toward a sky that looks more like evening. Follow Martian solar time instead, and your settlement remains synchronized with the sun while slipping further out of step with Earth. Work schedules move, meetings drift, the convenient hours for calling home disappear and return at different points in the cycle. A permanent settlement would almost certainly choose Mars. You cannot build an entire society around a clock that ignores the sunlight outside. Watches would still display familiar hours, but calendars would count sols instead of Earth days. The wall display might not show an ordinary month and date. It might read Sol 183, year 4. That choice has a cost, and it lands on the people you left behind. You tell your family, let's call every Sunday at 8 my time. At first it lands in their evening, same as always. A few weeks later that same 8 o'clock hits their midnight. A few weeks after that, it lands in the middle of their workday. Not a scheduling hiccup. A slow erosion of the 1 hour you shared. Mars does not argue with you about this. It simply pulls your social life out of alignment, one sol at a time, until the people who love you are asleep when you call and awake when you are not. Here's where it gets stranger. If a stretched day does this much to a single phone call, think about what a stretched year does to everything else. Mars takes about 687 Earth days to circle the Sun, almost 1.9 Earth years. The tilt is close enough to Earth's that you still get 4 seasons. Each one simply runs twice as long. Winter is not a mood on Mars. It is a strategic problem. Sunlight at the surface drops. Temperatures fall to far below -60 Celsius, something like -76 Fahrenheit, and stay there for weeks or months at a stretch. Heating, insulation, and stored power all have to carry a colony through a season that outlasts anything Earth ever asked of a building. So you build winter mode into the culture itself. More power gets banked ahead of time. Non-essential electricity gets cut. Long rover trips stop. Greenhouses shift to leaner lighting schedules to save what power remains, trading a full harvest for a smaller one that still comes in. None of this is optional, and none of it is announced with alarm. It simply becomes the shape the year takes. Kids grow up already knowing that some stretches of the year are fat, with resources to spare, and some are lean, with margins cut tight, the way children on Earth once knew a good harvest from a bad one without being told the numbers behind it. The wall calendar was never really about Earth holidays. It was always about which season your life support is entering next. Then comes the harder question. Who actually owns your time, Mars or Earth? Earth tries to stay in charge for as long as it can. Mission Control wants its office hours. Companies want their meetings. But the math will not cooperate. That 40-minute drift means a colony running strict Mars time slides almost 5 hours out of sync with Earth every single week. The workaround is local solar time for anything done outside, paired with rotating call windows or dedicated Earthshift teams who stay up through the Martian night to catch an aligned hour. It works for a while. The people holding that alignment together are permanently jet-lagged inside their own habitat, propping up a connection that keeps sliding no matter how hard they hold on. In the long run, the outcome is not close. Permanent settlers keep Mars time. Earth has to adapt, watching call windows slide slowly through the night on their end instead. And once that choice gets made differently by different groups, time itself splits the colony apart. One habitat runs on pure local soul time. A corporate dome down the tunnel locks to the Earth baseline instead. A science base tries to run both at once. Local time for anyone working the surface, the Earth baseline for anything logged and sent home. Walk through a pressure door and you can cross straight from morning into the middle of someone else's night, your watch and their clock, disagreeing completely, with nothing outside the window to settle the argument either way. Neighbors end up with a noon that lands on somebody else's midnight. Shift scheduling, who gets the convenient hours, who stays up for the Earth call, which habitat's clock counts as official, becomes something people actually argue and vote about, the same way other settlements once argued over water rights or property lines. Children in habitats 2 corridors apart can grow up never once managing a conversation while both are awake. Serious plans stop being measured in Earth years at all. A 10-year project becomes a little over 5 Martian years. Engineers rate a reactor or an air system not by a decade of service, but by 3 dust storm seasons and 4 winters, because that is the unit that actually predicts where, the unit the hardware itself will answer to. Contracts get written in Martian years, and a lease or a loan that would sound modest back on Earth suddenly covers a much larger share of a life. Education tracks local seasons and launch windows instead of a September start, so a child's schooling is paced by when supply ships can safely arrive, not by a fixed date on a distant calendar. Even the language shifts underneath you. Someone tells you, "See you next year," and what you hear is "See you in almost 700 days." A promise heavy enough that you actually feel its weight before you agree to it. Time turned out to be the first thing Earth had always handed you for free. On Mars, it was the first thing you had to build, argue over and defend, soul by soul. It would not be the last. Time was not the only free thing Earth had been handing you. Air came next, and it left far less room for negotiation. Step outside without a suit, and you do not get a slow realization that something is wrong. You get seconds. Surface pressure on Mars runs somewhere around 600 to 700 pascals. Earth sea level sits near 101,325. That puts you under less than 1% of the pressure your body evolved to expect. The same thin margin you would find standing 30 to 35 kilometers above Earth's surface, 19 to the 22 miles up, higher than almost anything that flies. Your lungs are not actually the main problem at that kind of exposure. The water in your blood and tissue starts to boil at ordinary body temperature the moment pressure drops that low. You black out first, consciousness goes in seconds. The rest follows fast. So you stop treating the outside as scenery and start treating it as a threat, pressing on every wall. Every door, every corridor, every rover cabin becomes a miniature spacecraft, holding a pocket of livable pressure against a vacuum that never stops pushing back. An unplanned opening is not an inconvenience. It is an emergency, because even a small crack vents a surprising amount of air fast, and the vacuum on the other side does not meet you halfway. The safe side of any door is whichever side has pressure in it, not whichever side happens to look like solid ground. You learn to read a habitat differently once you understand this. A landscape outside a viewport stops being a view and becomes a number, the pressure holding you apart from it. A hallway is not just a hallway, it is a stretch of engineered volume doing the quiet, constant work of staying sealed. Nobody outside ever has to think about the ground beneath a house holding still. Here, holding still is the whole job. But the reality was different. That same atmosphere trying to kill you is also the reason you get to stay. Chemically, the air outside is more than 95% carbon dioxide, with a thin trace of nitrogen and argon, and next to no oxygen at all. On Earth, carbon dioxide is waste. On Mars, it is raw material. Machines called solid oxide electrolysis units pull that gas in and split it apart into oxygen and carbon monoxide. This is not a proposal sitting on a whiteboard somewhere. A small version of one of these units already rode on a rover and produced real oxygen, grams of it per hour, straight out of the local air. Scale that process up and you get machines rated in kilograms per hour. One design built to put out 10 kilograms of oxygen a sol. Enough, its engineers claimed, to keep 100 people breathing at something close to Earth normal levels. Not a liability, a feedstock. The molecule that fills your lungs with nothing useful becomes oxygen to breathe, oxidizer for rocket fuel, and raw stock for a dozen other reactions besides. The dust is a smaller danger, and a much longer one. The grains run almost impossibly fine, down near the size of a single micrometer, light enough to hang suspended in the thin air for a very long time. Wind, rover wheels, the blast from a landing rocket, any of it throws the dust back into circulation. So the planet runs a slow, relentless kind of weather that never fully settles. Wind here can reach tens of meters per second, something like 70 to 90 kilometers an hour, 45 to 55 miles an hour, by the numbers you already know. And here is the part that catches people off guard. Because the air is so thin, that wind will not knock you down. It will not knock you down. What it does instead is quieter, and worse. It scratches visors. It works into moving parts. It coats panels and clogs radiators until they run hot, grinding down hardware year after year through nothing more dramatic than patience. Every so often, that patient grinding turns into something much bigger. Dust lifts from several regions at once and spreads into a haze that wraps the whole planet. Ground-level sunlight can drop by more than 90%. A solar farm rated at 1 megawatt on a clear sol might put out only a few tens of kilowatts, and it stays that way for weeks, not hours. The sky sliding from bright orange down to a dim, dirty twilight. For a colony that runs on sunlight, that is not a lighting problem. It is a food emergency and a power emergency arriving at the same hour. Greenhouses forced onto weaker artificial light, or losing their yield outright. Batteries draining while operators watch the power graphs the way people on Earth track a hurricane making landfall. What that actually costs a settlement, in rationed systems and hard choices about who keeps power and who does not, is a reckoning still waiting up ahead. None of this changes the planar fact underneath it. Unbreathable, unstable air still has to be made, held, and counted. Inside, you stop thinking in single numbers and start thinking in partial pressures. Oxygen held near 20 to 22 kilopascals. Carbon dioxide kept down near a few tenths of a kilopascal. Nitrogen and buffer gas filling out the rest. Engineers log kilograms of carbon dioxide scrubbed every sol. Kilograms of oxygen produced and stored. Tank levels checked against how fast they are supposed to drain. Even a slow leak earns its own number. A habitat might lose a few dozen grams of air an hour, about a soda bottle's worth over a week. Small on paper, expensive in practice because that gas was sealed inside a fixed volume, and every gram lost has to be replaced with power, maintenance, and hardware wear. On Earth, you ignore the atmosphere until a storm rolls in. On Mars, pressure, composition, leak rate, filter load, and compressor duty cycle are numbers on a screen you check the way you check your own pulse, because in a real sense, that is exactly what they are. The clock was the first invisible thing Mars made you fight for. The air turned out to be the second. It would not be the last thing your own body would have to answer for. Your own body was always going to be next on the list of things Mars quietly renegotiates. Step on a scale here and it still reads 80 kilograms, about 176 pounds, because your mass has not changed at all. What changed is the pull underneath you. Martian gravity sits at roughly 38% of Earth's. So that same 80 kilograms feels closer to carrying 30 kilograms, about 66 pounds, everywhere you go. At first, that feels like a gift. You lift more than you used to. Stairs stop being a chore. Your back stops complaining. You pick up a crate built for 2 people and carry it alone, and some part of your brain quietly files that away as evidence. I am stronger now. But bone and muscle do not listen to your brain's scorekeeping. They listen to load, and the load just dropped by 2/3. Wait, that feeling of new strength is not strength at all. It is the first sign of a body being told it can relax. On Earth, you never think about this because you never have to. Just standing in a kitchen, walking to a mailbox, climbing a single flight of stairs, all of it is quiet strength training running in the background of an ordinary day, powered by a full 1G you never asked for. Take that away, and nothing dramatic happens right away. Muscles thin. Bone density slips. The body downgrades itself to match the smaller demand placed on it. The danger does not show up while you're strolling through a corridor. It shows up during a fire, a breach, a medical emergency. The one moment you need everything your body has, after years of quietly coasting. So exercise here is not a wellness habit. It is load-bearing infrastructure, as mandatory as the air system. Resistance machines simulate Earth-level force. Treadmills strap you into a harness that pulls down harder than the planet does on its own. Elastic suits resist every reach and every step. None of it looks like anything more than a gym routine, but it functions as a repair loop, patching every day what 0.38 G quietly erases the moment you stop paying attention. Skip it. And you are not just changing your own body. You're shaping the skeleton the next generation of Martians is born into. Space stations without strict countermeasures have logged bone density losses of 1 to 2% a month. Mars is gentler than that. There is at least some gravity working with you, but the loss still compounds year after year, and hips, spines, and long leg bones grow more fragile the less they are asked to carry. 2 futures run in parallel from here, and most people expect only one of them. The first is technological, medicines that slow bone loss, exoskeletons and compressive suits that trick a skeleton into believing it still carries Earth weight. The second is biological and slower. Across generations, the people whose bodies tolerate low gravity, who lose less density and respond well to loading, simply do better, and the population drifts toward denser bone and tougher connective tissue without anyone designing it that way. Either way, fitness on Mars was never about how you look. There is no beach here. It is about whether you can sprint the length of a tunnel to a leak, carry another person out of danger, and do it without your own skeleton failing you first. Gravity does not stop at your bones. Fluids inside your body settle differently too. Astronauts in orbit come home with puffy faces and thinned legs, fluid drifting upward without full gravity to pull it down. On Mars, the shift is smaller, but it is not zero, and your body has to find a new baseline for pressure in your head, your eyes, your inner ear. Given enough time, that pressure change can reshape the eye itself, pressing on nerves and bending vision just slightly out of true. You may need new glasses on Mars for reasons that have nothing to do with age. And deep in your inner ear, the tiny fluid system that tells you which way is down recalibrates too. After months of a weaker signal, your brain simply accepts 0.38 G as the new normal. Go back to Earth, or step into a spinning station built to fake full gravity, and that recalibrated brain gets confused about up and down all over again. A person raised entirely on Mars could feel seasick walking down an ordinary Earth sidewalk. Even the way you move starts to drift from anything Earth would recognize. Strides get longer and floatier. Falls take longer to land, giving you more time to react, though misjudging the timing still gets you hurt. A 2-meter vertical jump, roughly 6.5 feet, nothing special in a padded Martian gym, would be an Olympic record on Earth. Thrown objects trace long, lazy arcs that look wrong to eyes trained on Earth's version of a ball in flight. So the sports that grow up here are not shrunken copies of Earth's games. They are new ones built around 3-dimensional arenas, jumpers clearing 10 to 12 meters, 30 to 40 feet, athletes bouncing wall to wall down a racing corridor. A child raised on Mars treats a 3 to 4 meter high jump, 10 to 13 feet, as an ordinary Tuesday, not a superpower. Their instincts, their reflexes, the whole vocabulary their body speaks, all of it gets written in 0.38G from birth. And that is where the real cost of all this finally lands. Take a body and a nervous system built entirely around a third of Earth's pull and set it down under Earth's full gravity, almost 3 times what it has ever known. And the result is not a hard workout. It is a total overload, something closer to being dressed, without warning, in a suit made of concrete. A heart that has only ever pumped blood against 0.38G. Bones that have only ever carried a third of their owner's true weight. For someone born and raised on Mars, a casual trip home might not exist. Short visits could require months of preparation, medical monitoring, an exoskeleton just to stand upright. And even then, Earth might stay something watched on a screen, on a delay, rather than a place you can simply walk into. This is not moving between 2 countries. It is crossing a line your own body draws for you. A line that hands out a kind of disability nobody would have earned on the world where they were born. Home stops being the planet under your birth certificate. It becomes whichever gravity your body was actually built to survive. Gravity, at least, is something you can feel working on you, day after day, one aching joint at a time. The next thing waiting for a Martian body announces itself no such way. It moves through walls, through skin, through the deepest parts of a cell, and you would never know it was there at all. On Earth, you are wrapped in 2 invisible bodyguards, a thick atmosphere and a strong magnetic field, and together they catch or deflect almost everything the sun and the galaxy throw at you. Mars strips both away. The magnetic field here is weak and patchy, a few scattered pockets of magnetized rock left over from a planet that used to have a real one. The atmosphere is a thin whisper, not a wall, so the particles come down almost unfiltered, straight through the sky and into you. You cannot feel it happening. It does not burn, does not sting, gives no warning at all. Typical surface radiation on Mars runs somewhere around 240 to 300 millisieverts a year, the unit doctors use to measure radiation dose. Back on Earth, background radiation from soil, air, and the sun adds up to about 5 or 6 millisieverts a year. Do the math, and Mars is running 40 to 50 times hotter. Spend 2.5 to 3 Earth years on the surface, 1 full mission, and you absorb roughly what a person on Earth would collect over more than a century of ordinary life. Not a fluke exposure, not a bad week, a permanent tax on every cell in your body, paid whether you notice it or not. That is why radiation is not a medical afterthought here. It is a design driver, ranked with air and water from the very first blueprint, because the damage adds up in your DNA long before it shows up on any chart. Keeping your yearly dose down near 50 to 100 millisieverts means you cannot simply build a pretty glass box and hope. You need mass between your body and the sky, rock, soil, or water, stacked thick enough to catch what the planet no longer catches for you. The simplest answer is depth. Push habitats underground, or bury them under regolith, the loose broken soil and rock covering the surface. A couple of meters of packed regolith cuts your exposure drastically, so a roof 2 to 3 meters thick, 6 to 10 feet, stops being decoration and becomes a shield. Hydrogen atoms are especially good at slowing radiation, so some walls come as 2 shells with water tanks sandwiched between them, each holding tens of cubic meters. A medium backyard swimming pool wrapped flat around your living room. To your eye, it is a wall panel. To your dosimeter, it is armor. Where the ground offers it, you take the shortcut nature already built, wide lava tubes and caverns big enough to hold city blocks, with meters of solid basalt overhead doing the shielding for free. You do not build up on Mars so much as carve sideways into stone. Once shielding becomes a survival requirement, the map of the city quietly turns into a map of dose. Surface greenhouses under thin, transparent roofs sit in the higher risk zones. Labs buried deep in a lava tube sit in the safest. Transit tunnels and vehicle bays fall somewhere in between. Outdoor jobs, solar farm maintenance, antenna repair, geological survey work become radiation shift work, tracked in hours and cumulative dose, the same way another world tracks a paycheck. Your employment file lists lifetime exposure right next to your salary. People who are pregnant or planning to be often work and live inside the most heavily shielded zones available because the map of the city has quietly become part of the map of your life plans too. But here's where it gets strange. The steady background dose is only half the danger. The sun itself, roughly every 11 years, moves through a more active phase and throws off sudden bursts of high-energy particles. On Earth, those bursts mostly light up the sky as an aurora and scramble a few radio signals. On Mars, with no real magnetic shield to catch them, a strong burst arrives as a sharp spike in dose at ground level. Monitoring runs constantly, orbiting spacecraft, ground sensors, telescopes trained on the sun, watching for the warning. When a serious event is detected, you may have less than an hour to get underground or into a dedicated storm shelter, built from extra water, regolith, and dense material, reachable from almost anywhere in the settlement within minutes. Work stops. Everyone moves. The colony waits it out, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. And when it is over, the dose counters do not reset. They only add. Carried far enough, all of this stops being a problem you solve once and starts being a problem your children inherit. Slightly elevated radiation, generation after generation, nudges mutation rates upward. Most of those mutations do nothing, or do harm. A rare few shift the odds in someone's favor. A little more resistance, a little better repair. No comic book powers, just small statistical drift. Medicine leans hard into watching for it. Regular whole body scans, blood work, genetic screening, doctors tracking a person's lifetime dose the way an accountant tracks a balance. And that watching leads somewhere harder. If a gene tied to higher cancer risk under this exact environment can be identified, do you edit it out of an embryo before birth? Do you screen for it while planning a pregnancy? Do you offer or quietly pressure a preventive gene therapy whose own long-term effects are still unknown? Earth argues about these questions in the abstract. Mars cannot. The population is small enough that every fraction of a percent of added cancer risk is not a statistic. It is someone you already know by name. Gravity rewrote your bones. You are the experiment again, and this time the thing being rewritten is the code inside every cell your children will inherit. Sieverts and millisieverts stop being units in a textbook. They start showing up in medical records, in legal arguments, in quiet conversations about who accepts which dose. Radiation decides where you are allowed to build, how thick your walls have to be, how much rock sits over your head while you sleep. That dose map, greenhouses in the danger zone, labs buried safe, shelters within running distance of everywhere, was never just a chart pinned to a wall. It was the first draft of every wall about to rise, or burrow, out of the Martian ground. Those walls do not rise the way walls rise on Earth. Here, they do not hold up weight from above. They hold something in. Interior pressure sits between 50 and 100 kilopascals, the unit engineers use to describe how hard air pushes on a surface, and that range sits close to what your body knew on Earth at sea level. Step outside that wall, and Mars gives you its usual 0.6 to 0.7 of a kilopascal. The difference runs as high as 150 times. Every wall, every window, every seam is built to hold that difference back. All day, every day, for years on end. A building on Mars is not fighting gravity. It is fighting to keep from exploding outward. Take a single square meter of window. Mars pushes against it with a continuous outward force close to the weight of a small car. Not for a moment, for as long as the glass stands. Engineers ask a blunt question before any panel goes in. How many tens of thousands of newtons, the basic unit of force, can this take? And what happens the day one bolt fails? The answer shapes everything you build. Curved forms spread that load evenly, so spheres and cylinders dominate the skyline you do have. Flat walls want to bow outward under the strain, so you keep them small or brace them heavily. Buildings end up thick, compact, and round rather than tall and glassy. Airlocks stop being simple doors and become layered spacecraft hardware, gaskets, hinges, and seals engineered to hold this pressure difference thousands of times over without failing once. Even the air inside is a negotiation. Run a habitat at full sea level pressure and breathing is easy. Fire risk stays low, but the walls get heavier and a leak drains the room faster. Cut pressure closer to half and the walls lighten, but the gas mix changes and so does every emergency drill written for that room. Somewhere on Mars, in every dome, every corridor, every sealed cell, that one number is still being argued over. So more and more, you stop building up and start building sideways. Orbital scans show long volcanic tunnels running under the surface. Some only tens of meters wide, others wide enough to swallow entire city blocks whole. Meters of solid basalt, a dense volcanic rock, sit overhead, shielding radiation and holding a steady temperature through the planet's brutal swing between day and night. You cut access shafts down and hang your city off the walls and floor instead. Decks stacked on decks, bridges strung across open volume, narrow corridor streets threading between labs, warehouses, and homes. You still seal every space and hold the same pressure difference as any surface building, but you are no longer fighting an open sky from every direction. The safest, largest parts of every Martian city end up buried. You might picture Martian cities as glass domes stretching across the horizon. Not quite. The real cities burrow. The domes are something else entirely. A handful still rise on the surface, built from layered glass, tough plastics, and composite shells that hold pressure while filtering out most of the ultraviolet light Mars no longer blocks for you. One might stretch 100 meters across, about the length of a football field, tall enough for full-grown trees, open plazas and walkways where kids run without a suit for the first time in their lives. It matters to people in a way no number captures. It says we are not just hiding down here, we are building somewhere to live. But domes leak more, take more damage from dust and small impacts, and cost far more to keep sealed than a wall of stone. So a city builds one, maybe two, and lets them stand as its public face, its meeting ground, the image visitors see first, while the real weight of daily life stays underground. Because a single breach can kill in seconds, no building trusts itself as one open space. Every block becomes its own sealed cell, closed off by pressure bulkheads and blast doors that slam shut within seconds of any sensor detecting a drop. Your neighborhood is not a street. It is whichever rooms and corridors share your air. Your home, your kid's school, your job, all inside one pressure system, and crossing into the next one might mean an airlock, a badge check, even a different set of local rules. Multiple air loops, separate power feeds, alternate routes, all doubled and tripled, so that if one cell fails and empties into vacuum, its neighbors seal shut and keep breathing. The city behaves like a fleet of ships docked hull to hull, each one able to close its hatches and let a wounded neighbor go quiet without losing the rest. Sealed living changes what you hear and smell too. There is no wind out here, no forest, no distant traffic drifting in from somewhere else. What you get instead is machinery that never stops. Fans, pumps, compressors, the low rumble of a tunnel vehicle passing somewhere below your feet. It is not loud, it is constant, and left unplanned. It wears people down. So architects build in sound absorption from the start. Quiet cores, padded ceilings, insulated rooms where the hum finally drops away. Smell works the same way. In a sealed loop, odor has nowhere to go until a filter catches it. So the air system has to strip out not just carbon dioxide, but the smell of cooking, sweat, machinery, and every cleaning chemical in the building. Paint, plastic, and fabric get chosen partly for what they refuse to give off. Farms get placed where their earthy smell is welcome, not piped straight into someone's bedroom. Skip this work and the irritation builds quietly, and small conflicts start to escalate over nothing at all. The city, in the end, is one long argument against the sky, against radiation, against silence, against its own recycled air. And soon it has to win an argument against something even less forgiving. What happens to the water, the air, and the waste, once none of it is ever allowed to simply disappear? Once a wall seals shut, nothing on the other side of it truly disappears. It stays. It has to go somewhere. And on Mars somewhere almost always means back into the loop with you. Start with water, because water turns out to be the truest measure of wealth on this planet. Here, the real bank account is not measured in credits or ore. It is measured in kilograms of stored water and every colonist learns to carry a running balance of it in their head. Radar and orbital scans have already found huge slabs of ice locked under the surface, thick enough in places that melting it all and spreading it flat could drown the planet in a shallow ocean. In some regions, it sits less than a meter down, about 3 feet, roughly the height of a kitchen counter. You are standing over frozen lakes, and most days you never think about it. A single cubic meter of that ice, about the size of a large refrigerator lying on its side, holds close to 1,000 kilograms of water. Under a tight recycling plan, that is enough to cover drinking and basic hygiene for several people for weeks. Melt it, filter it, pump it into tanks, and it becomes almost everything you touch. Drinking water, wash water, hydroponic feed, industrial coolant, even the water poured into a wall for radiation shielding. It sounds like abundance. It is not abundance. The ice sits locked in place, often in terrain that is hard to reach, and melting, filtering, and moving, it costs real energy and real hardware every single time. Sit on millions of tons of frozen water, and you still count every liter that comes out of the tap. The International Space Station already recycles more than 90% of its water, pulling it back out of urine, sweat, breath, and wall condensation, running it through filters, distillers, and purifiers. A Martian colony, built to last generations, pushes past that, toward 95% recycled or better. You stop thinking in gallons a day. You start thinking in kilograms, a soul. The target sits under 50 litres a person a day, about 13 gallons, roughly what 3 or 4 office water cooler jugs would hold. That sounds generous until you remember it has to cover drinking, cooking, washing, laundry, and a share of what your food is grown in. So the long shower does not survive the trip. Some colonies have no showers at all, not the kind you would recognize, just sponge baths, fine mist sprays, ultrasonic cleaners, fabric engineered to resist odor for days at a stretch. Toilets run on vacuum instead of water, separating liquid from solid the moment you use them, and every drain in the building recovers what it can before the water is allowed to leave the system. You live against a number on a screen, today's personal water budget, 40 litres, and when the filters run close to capacity or a pump goes down, everyone feels it at once. Wasting water here is not rude. It is a direct cut into how long the colony survives. Breathing on Mars is not a background gift either. It is an industrial product with its own supply chain. Electrolyzers split water into hydrogen and oxygen. Solid oxide units crack carbon dioxide pulled from the thin outside air into oxygen and carbon monoxide. Both feed tanks that can hold anywhere from a few hundred to several thousand kilograms of oxygen, more than a loaded delivery truck could carry, with computers tracking consumption against replacement. Inside, the air itself sits at a partial pressure of oxygen close to 20 kilopascals, about the same slice of the mix your lungs grew up breathing on Earth, with buffer gas making up the rest, and carbon dioxide held deliberately low, which means every activity that touches the air becomes a line item. A birthday cake with real candles is an oxygen spike somebody has to account for. A new welding tool or a combustion engine on a rover adds ongoing load to the budget. Even a training drill gets logged by how much air the suited team burned working outside. An oxygen alarm here does not sound like a smoke detector. It sounds like a fire bell. There is no fresh air outside to evacuate to. Nothing you throw away actually leaves either. Human waste, food scraps, and plant trimmings go into digesters that break them down into biogas for the generators, fertilizer that goes straight back into the hydroponic beds, and feedstock for the microbes running the rest of the loop. Plastic is not buried. There are no landfills to bury it in. It is sorted, broken back down to its base components, and fed into printers that turn it into tools, parts, and packaging again. Metal is recovered, melted, reformed. Old electronics are stripped down to the elements inside them. You design a chair or a valve, knowing it will one day be taken apart and rebuilt as something else, not trash. Raw material sitting in the wrong place for the moment. The alternative is to send it away, and sending anything off Mars means burning enormous amounts of fuel to lift a few kilograms clear of the ground, at a cost that can run into the tens of thousands of dollars per kilogram. more than a new car for a bag of garbage. That is not the goal because it looks responsible on a report. It is the goal because a loop that leaks becomes a shortage, and a shortage becomes an emergency, sometimes years after the leak first opened. And here is the part that should worry you more than any number so far. A leaking water main on Earth is an inconvenience, a wet patch on a sidewalk, a call to a utility company. On Mars, a recycling system running at just 1% below full efficiency looks, on any single day, like nothing at all. But it never resets. It compounds, sol after sol, year after year, quietly eating into reserves that looked bottomless on the day the colony was founded. What gets billed as centuries of supply can, at that steady 1% loss, turn out to be decades. Not centuries. Decades. So everything gets watched. Toilets log every liquid and solid volume that passes through them. Pipes carry flow sensors and leak detectors at every joint. Tanks weigh themselves in real time and report the number. Forecasting software takes in shower frequency, new greenhouse plantings, and hours logged outside in a suit, and turns them into a running prediction of what the water and air reserves will look like months from now. Planners sometimes translate the results into something you can actually picture. A reserve equal to 4/1000ths of one Lake Michigan, or ice enough to refill one household's worth of water every 20 years at the current rate of loss. The whole colony lives inside a moving spreadsheet that never stops updating. Kilograms in, kilograms out, efficiency measured against yesterday, and a number that starts drifting the wrong way gets treated as a warning about the entire project of living here, not a maintenance ticket. Every drop was accounted for. Every breath was accounted for. What was not yet accounted for, not by a long distance, was the last line on that spreadsheet. The food that had to grow out of ground, which was, technically, still trying to kill you. The ground itself was the problem. Step outside a habitat and scoop up a handful of that rust-colored regolith, the loose rock and dust covering the surface, and you are holding something with no living thing in it at all. Earth soil teems with bacteria, fungi, and small crawling creatures that spend their whole lives turning waste into nutrients roots can use. Martian regolith holds none of that. It is crushed rock and dust, sterile down to the last grain, and it carries something worse than emptiness. Perchlorates, chlorine-based salts that choke plant metabolism and damage the human thyroid, sit mixed through nearly every scoop. It is not soil. It is crushed rock laced with poison. Not dirt, toxic dust that only looks like dirt. So nobody plants a seed and walks away. First the regolith gets washed. Water and filters rinse the perchlorates out, or a chemical treatment breaks them down into safer compounds. And either path costs time, hardware, and water. You have already learned to count by the liter. What is left afterward is not soil either. It is clean rock grains, sterile and dead. Then it gets rebuilt. Chosen earth microbes go into the clean regolith to do the work bacteria and fungi do for free back home, breaking down nutrients, feeding roots, holding the whole system together. Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and trace minerals go in measured to the gram per kilogram of substrate. The pH is tuned crop by crop. Water content gets watched constantly, because too dry or too wet and the fragile microbial system built from scratch can collapse in days. The result behaves less like a field and more like a product off a lab bench, tested, logged, and dialed in one crop at a time. That lab-grade dirt still has to live inside a pressurized shell, and pressurized shells are expensive by the cubic meter. So farms do not spread outward, they stack upward. Multi-tier hydroponic towers pack leafy greens and herbs into dense racks, roots sitting straight in nutrient solution instead of soil, water and minerals pumped through on a controlled cycle. Overhead, LED lights tuned heavy on red and blue wavelengths, the colors plants actually use for photosynthesis, stand in for the sun. A single cubic meter of well-run vertical farm, about the footprint of a large water heater standing on end, can yield tens of kilograms of edible greens a year. Sensors track pH and nutrient levels the way the water system tracks leaks, catching drift before it becomes a crop failure. Some colonies keep a bed or two of real regolith anyway, not for the yield, but because people like the feel of actual dirt under their hands. None of that replaces imported food fast enough to skip it, and imported food is where the numbers turn brutal. Lifting mass off Earth, crossing tens of millions of kilometers, and landing it gently on Mars turns every kilogram into a small fortune. Thousands of dollars for a single kilogram of food, sometimes more. A bag of rice that costs a few dollars back home can cost as much as a good laptop by the time it reaches a Martian pantry. Nobody wastes it. So local calories ramp up fast, starting with the boring plants. Wheat, potatoes, soy, staples chosen because they work, not because anyone finds them exciting. Then the stranger sources. Microalgae bioreactors, sealed tanks where fast-growing algae turn light and carbon dioxide into dense biomass within days, get processed down into protein, oils, and supplements. Insect farms, crickets and mealworms turn plant scraps into high-quality protein and fat, and a growing tray the size of a small bedroom can produce tens of kilograms of insect protein a month. Luxuries and specialty items still come from Earth. Survival calories cannot. If they did, the food bill alone would sink the mission. But the greenhouse is not only a factory. Walk into a large dome built at Earth-like pressure and humidity, and the farm is the only place on the whole planet that smells alive. Rows of tomatoes, beans, lettuce, and dwarf fruit trees double as walkways and meeting spots. Kids learn biology by walking past the system that feeds them. Adults take their breaks there because the air feels different there. Softer, less like metal and rock. Concerts happen among the grow racks. Ceremonies happen under the LED towers. Teachers and therapists and planners end up sharing the same floor space as the people running the irrigation lines. Because the greenhouse crew are not just farmers here, they are the ones keeping the closest thing the colony has to a park alive. Your park on Mars is the greenhouse. Neglect either half of that, the food or the feeling, and both suffer. And here is what those greenhouses are quietly teaching, long before anyone tries anything larger. Every dome, tunnel, and growing chamber is already a tiny artificial Earth, a pocket of controlled air, water cycle, and living ecosystem sealed off from the planet outside. Running thousands of these pockets for years generates hard numbers. How many grams of carbon dioxide a square meter of leaf pulls from the air each hour? How many grams of gas leak through a membrane wall every second, even when the wall is intact? How many kilowatts it takes to hold one greenhouse stable through a single dust storm? Those numbers do not stay small. Scale a few thousand cubic meters of greenhouse air up to a whole planet's atmosphere, trillions of cubic kilometers of it, and the same leak rates and the same power draws turn into numbers no colony could ever supply. Warming a dome and warming a planet are not the same problem at different sizes. They are different problems entirely. One is a bathtub, the other is an ocean. So the real terraforming data, if it is ever used for something larger, is not coming from a grand unbuilt machine sitting in a plan somewhere. It is coming from someone checking a nutrient line, patching a slow leak, and adjusting a light cycle, one greenhouse at a time, soul after soul. Food solved, or solved enough to survive on, still needed something to run every pump, every LED, every filter in the loop that grew it. And that something was never guaranteed. That something is electricity, and on Mars it is never a given. Every pump moving nutrient solution, every LED tuned red and blue over a rack of greens, every filter scrubbing the air you have already learned to count by the liter draws from the same well. And the well itself is shallow. Start with the sun. Mars sits farther out, so sunlight arrives at roughly 43% of its Earth strength, less than half the light falling on a rooftop back home. A panel that would deliver a full kilowatt on a clear day in an ordinary backyard delivers under 430 watts on a clear day near a Martian dome, and that is the best case, before a single grain of dust settles on the glass. To run anything more than a handful of rooms, you are not talking about a few panels bolted to a roof. You are talking about fields, square kilometers of them, stretching toward the horizon, feeding a grid measured in megawatts just to cover the basics. And the dust never stops falling. Fine particles settle on every exposed surface, solar arrays included, and output slides day after day if nobody intervenes. So you build fleets of small robotic cleaners, brushes and blowers and electrostatic sweepers, crawling panel rows around the clock, because a human crew in a suit is too slow and too exposed to do that work by hand. You tilt the panels, tracking the weak sun across a dim sky, squeezing out every extra percent you can find, and still, solar stays fragile, one storm away from trouble, a first lifeline, never the only one. You already know what a real storm does to that lifeline. Ground sunlight can fall more than 90% for weeks at a stretch, the kind of collapse that once turned a whole city's solar output into a rounding error. A settlement cannot run its air scrubbers, its water pumps, and its grow lights on a rounding error. Solar could not be the backbone here, not on a world like this. Something else had to carry the weight. So nuclear power stops being optional. Small fission reactors, in the same spirit as the compact kilopower class units already tested for spaceflight, go in early, each one putting out somewhere between tens and hundreds of kilowatts, running quietly for years on almost no refueling. As the colony grows, the reactors grow with it, climbing into the megawatt class, until a single buried core can carry a small town's life support, lighting, and essential industry on its own. The reactors sit underground or behind heavy shielding, in carved caverns or armored bunkers, and their waste heat is never wasted. It warms habitats, preheats water, keeps greenhouses from freezing, freeing every spare watt for oxygen production instead of space heaters. Engineers stop thinking in kilowatts and start thinking in megawatt hours banked per soul, the way a household thinks in a monthly grocery budget. Nuclear becomes the thing that holds through storms, through long dark winters, through every other system's worst day. Even a reactor running flawlessly needs something standing between it and the moment demand spikes. With no continent-wide grid to lean on, storage is not a convenience. It is life support in its own right, and it comes in layers. Battery banks catch the fast stuff, the second-to-second surges, the gap between a cloud of dust crossing the sun and a reactor spinning up to cover it. For the slower stretches, hours into days, electrolyzers split water into hydrogen and oxygen while power is abundant, banking that hydrogen in tanks or carved-out cavities, ready to run back through fuel cells when it is not. Molten salt and other thermal stores handle the slowest swings of all, a long cold snap, a storm that will not lift. The whole stack exists to answer one blunt question. If a storm pins the sky for 30 sols, the better part of an Earth month, reactor output fixed, and some piece of hardware inevitably failing, does the stored reserve carry the lights, the pumps, and the air the entire way through? If the honest answer is no, you add capacity, or you cut something. That scarcity reaches into ordinary life fast. You do not plug in a 2 kilowatt heater just because your feet are cold. Big loads get scheduled, booked into windows, an automated system shows you when solar and reactor output are both strong and storage sites near full, and starting one outside that window can get you politely refused. A refusal rarely ends the conversation. It turns into a trade, dim the corridor lights for an hour, push the load to tomorrow's window, borrow against tomorrow's ration to cover today's. Public screens track total draw, storage percentage, reactor output, and solar performance. Check the way people elsewhere check the weather or a phone's battery. Leaving lights burning in an empty room stops being a minor habit and starts being a small social offense. Children grow up reading a power dashboard before they can read a clock, and celebrations quietly drift toward the hours when there is power to spare. And here is where comfort ends, and something closer to politics begins. Once everyone can see, in real time, exactly how much power exists and who is drawing on it, control of that supply stops being an engineering question. Who gets to flip the switch that keeps your air moving? Some settlements push for solar spread across many small, independently owned cooperatives, so no single failure can black out a whole city. Others trust only a tightly managed, professionally run nuclear core. Others still want one grid, one authority, one hand on the dial. Every choice changes who thrives and who does not. A district with strong reactors and deep storage can support more farms, more industry, more people. A district that gambled on solar with thin backup can look fine for years and then hit a hard wall the first bad storm season. This is not a disagreement about kilowatts. It is a disagreement about who gets to decide when your air keeps flowing and when it does not. Power decided who kept their lights on through the long storms. It was about to decide who got to dig, who got to build, and who got to own whatever came out of the ground. The digging started with the ground itself, because Mars never made you look far for material worth taking. The red that colors every photograph comes from iron oxide, rust baked into the dust for billions of years. And that rust is only the first clue. Mixed through the same dirt are sulfates, silicates, and in some regions enough aluminum, copper, and nickel to matter. None of it is a rich vein waiting to be struck. It is ore spread thin across an entire world, low grade, but everywhere. And on a planet where every incoming kilogram costs a fortune to fly in, everywhere beats concentrated. Early industry does not aim for elegance. Crush the regolith, sort it, run it through basic processing, and you pull out iron, aluminum, and silicon, enough for structural beams, plates, wiring, and glass. Compressed regolith gets baked into brick, melted ore gets cast into simple metal parts, rough panes get pulled for windows and greenhouse walls. None of it looks refined. A local brick, heavy and plain, is worth more than a beautifully finished one shipped from Earth. Because the shipped version drags along the same launch math that once made a bag of rice cost as much as a laptop. The rule governing the factory floor is blunt. It does not have to be nice. It has to be not from Earth. You might picture that factory as a construction site, suited workers hauling brick by hand. It is not. Building a city one worker at a time, in suits, in radiation, in near vacuum, does not scale. So the labor goes to machines. Large printers feed on crushed, filtered regolith and fuse it, without fully melting it, layer by layer, into walls, arches and shells, shaped like continuous beads of solidifying stone. Each machine manages only tens of kilograms of stone dust an hour, a few sacks of cement worth of wall, slow next to an ordinary construction site back home. But it runs through the night without complaint, curving every surface to hold pressure the way the architecture already demands. And a handful of technicians in a control room can supervise a whole swarm of them. The factory floor ends up quiet. Conveyors move dust. Heaters and lasers do the fusing. Robotic arms set the conduits. People watch screens. So what does a colony built this way actually send back to Earth? Not iron, not aluminum, not a single brick. Shipping tons of metal across tens of millions of kilometers to sell it on a planet already full of metal makes no economic sense at all, and everyone running the numbers knows it early. What moves instead is information, and information weighs almost nothing. High-resolution surveys of an entire planet, subsurface maps of buried ice and ancient riverbeds, radiation, dust, and climate data no observatory on Earth can generate from 100 million kilometers away. Experiments run in 1/3 gravity that cannot be duplicated anywhere else. How materials age under that radiation, how organisms adapt to that pull, how fluids behave when poured somewhere other than Earth, patents on new materials born from constant dust and low pressure, simulations, training packages, and entertainment built on real Martian landscapes and real Martian physics, licensed back to a planet hungry for them. All of it travels as bits, and the shipping cost is a radio link and a few antennas. Mars turns out to be less a mine and more a laboratory that happens to sit on a planet. None of that laboratory runs itself, and every person inside it is expensive in a way no factory worker on Earth is. Each one represents years of training, a launch, months of transit, and a lifetime of continuous life support, air, water, food, shelter, medicine, on a world working constantly to kill them. A single fatal accident is never just a tragedy. It is a loss of skill, a loss of capacity, a loss of years of investment that cannot be rebuilt on short notice. So the dangerous, repetitive, and far from shelter work goes to rovers, drones, and robotic arms, while humans supervise, plan, research, and respond to emergencies instead of doing the digging themselves. Small populations force people to be several kinds of expert at once, engineer and medic, farmer and programmer, mechanic and geologist. Unemployment does not look like a shortage of demand for your skills. It looks like a closed system that cannot justify one more body without a clear, safe, high-value reason for that body to be there. Immigration and population growth stay tightly controlled no matter which economic model runs the colony, because every new person is another draw on air that has to be manufactured, not simply breathed. And manufactured air is exactly where the sharpest question in the whole economy waits. Somebody has to own the plant that makes it, the plant that recycles the water, the reactor that keeps both running. On Earth, miss a rent payment or a utility bill and life gets hard. On Mars, miss enough payments and the thing you lose is not comfort. It is oxygen. One model lets private companies build and own the habitats, the water plants, the recyclers, and the grid, charging residents monthly for a quota of air and water, the way a utility bills for electricity, profitable when it works, and catastrophic the moment it does not. The other model, sometimes called mission socialism, keeps the core life support in collective hands, a public authority or cooperative guaranteeing every resident air, water, minimal power, and basic medical care, with markets only forming around the extras. Most real settlements land somewhere between the two, a corporate district beside a cooperative beside a government sector, so that walking from one to the other can mean walking from a hallway where the air is a public service into one where every litre is metered and billed, evicting someone into a colder, thinner shielded section over unpaid debt, letting a single company hold the only reactor in a city, trading water rights and oxygen futures while other people's children breathe on the other end of that trade. None of it stays theoretical for long. Ownership of the machines that kept everyone breathing was never going to stay a business question. It was only ever waiting for someone to ask who had the right to enforce it. Enforcement is the easy word. The harder word is authority, and the treaties written before anyone ever lived on Mars solve almost none of it. Every major space treaty signed by Earth's governments agrees on one point. No nation can claim Mars as sovereign territory. It sounds tidy on paper. In practice, it leaves a canyon-sized gap, because the moment a permanent settlement lands, someone still has to decide what counts as a safe wall, a fair contract, a real crime. Lawyers spend years arguing about whether leasing a lava tube counts as owning it, whether a cooperative running an entire valley is a state in everything but name. None of that matters to the person standing at an airlock that has just been locked against them. Here is the part the treaties never answer. Power does not come from a flag. It does not come from a signature. It comes from whoever controls the air, the power, and the docking bay. Whoever runs a habitat's life support effectively writes the law inside it. Carry a passport from the most powerful country on Earth, and it won't matter if the local life support authority decides you are not welcome. Your government can do almost nothing about it from roughly 80 million kilometers away. That kind of control is never singular for long. A mature settlement is not one law under one roof. Wake up in a dome funded by a government agency. Walk to work through a tunnel owned by a private corporate zone. Spend the evening in a market quarter run by a cooperative with its own charter. 3 sets of contracts, 3 sets of labor rules, 3 different people to call when something goes wrong, all inside a walk of a few hundred meters. Cross a pressure bulkhead, and you have crossed a legal border. There is no customs booth, just a different badge scanner, a different logo on the wall. The same accident, 10 meters apart, can trigger a different investigation. Different insurance, different compensation, depending only on which side of that wall it happened on. Some of that gets exploited. Light regulation zones offer weaker protections workers accept anyway, because housing is scarce and the alternative is none. Cooperatives run membership like a citizenship test. Governments try to keep their own citizens under their own jurisdiction, hard to enforce when the nearest clinic sits under someone else's charter. Every shared tunnel and shared docking bay raises a question with no old precedent. Whose law governs a hallway that belongs to everyone and no one? Earth cannot referee any of this in real time, and the reason is simple physics. A radio signal between the 2 planets takes 4 to 24 minutes one way, depending on where each planet sits in its orbit. close to 50 minutes for a question and an answer to complete the round trip. There is no live court hearing across that gap, no waiting on a ruling from a parliament back home. By the time Earth answers about the airlock failure, the power outage, the strike on the factory floor, the crisis is already over. So local councils decide. They have to. A colony that waited for Earth's permission to act would not survive its own emergencies. That forces an uncomfortable question about status. Is a settlement a remote district of an Earth nation, granted a few adjusted seats in a parliament it will never sit in? Or is it something else, watched over by a joint authority answering to several nations at once? Within a few decades, people born on Mars start asking why their laws are written by people who never lived under a third of Earth's gravity, never sealed a suit, never rode out a storm in a buried shelter. Earth governments hold on because they paid for the reactors and the ships and the training. Martian communities claim a different authority, earned daily in the risk of simply being there. The same delay that slows a radio signal becomes a psychological distance too. And out of that gap grows the search for a government that has never existed before. Ownership gets stranger once you ask what exactly anyone is buying. A lava tube complex might have been excavated by a corporation, maintained for years by the residents who live inside it, and claimed on paper by an international body that treats Mars as common heritage. Buy an apartment there and you might be buying a slice of the structure, or a long-term lease on life support, or a membership in the cooperative that keeps the whole thing running. Inheritance makes it sharper still. Own a percentage of an air recycling plant because you helped build it, and that share might pass automatically to a child who never touches a wrench, collecting the benefit of air someone else still has to filter and pump. Let enough of that happen, and the systems that keep a city breathing start to decay under absentee ownership. So property law bends toward obligation instead of pure possession. A share in a reactor comes with a maintenance requirement attached. Hours of work or a contracted service, and heirs who refuse it have to sell the share or hand it off. Rent your module to a stranger and the same logic follows, because neighbours share your air, water, and emergency exits, and a landlord who cuts corners on maintenance is not being cheap. They are being dangerous. Critical property on Mars, in the end, looks less like a private possession and more like a utility concession. Not something you simply own, something you are trusted to keep running. Punishment runs into the same wall as everything else on Mars. Space. A dedicated prison, fully sealed, fully pressurized, costs more than most settlements can justify. And every square meter spent on punishment is a square meter not spent on housing, farming, or the industry that keeps everyone fed. Exile to the surface without support is not really a sentence. It is a death, and most societies will not call that justice. So punishment gets rebuilt out of smaller pieces. Fines, though few people on Mars carry a large financial cushion to draw one from. Restricted access, smaller rooms, fewer social spaces, heavier monitoring inside the same habitat, a soft version of a prison built without ever leaving the building. Mandatory labor, the unglamorous jobs nobody wants, waste processing, tunnel maintenance, long shifts watching a monitor in a remote corridor, therapy and mandatory counseling as a standard part of sentencing. Because in a sealed, high-pressure environment, a person's mental state is never only their own problem. For repeated or serious offenses, relocation to another settlement, restriction to certain sectors, or the suspension of citizenship and membership rights, with forced return to Earth as the last resort, limited by whichever launch window happens to be open. Every one of these choices is a balance. Too harsh, and you have built a slow, sealed kind of despair. Too lenient, and you have told everyone that the rules keeping them alive do not really apply. None of these systems, the jurisdiction, the delay, the ownership, the punishment, were written into any treaty back on Earth. They were written by the people living inside their consequences, one decision at a time. And a society that writes its own rules is already, quietly, becoming something more than a colony. Writing the rules is only the surface of it. Underneath the councils and the contracts, something slower is reshaping the people who wrote them, and it starts with a distance nobody chooses to feel every day. Home is never close. At its nearest, Earth still sits tens of millions of kilometers away. At its farthest, the two planets swing to more than 400 million kilometers apart, opposite sides of the sun, and you are farther from your birthplace than any human being has ever been, permanently. There is no weekend trip back, no emergency flight for a funeral, no quick walk down a street you remember. A message takes 4 minutes each way if the planets are close, closer to 24 if they are not. So conversation stops being a conversation. You record, you send, you walk away and do something else. An answer arrives later, sometimes much later, and you send the next one without knowing how the last one landed. Real-time back and forth, the kind Earth never thinks about, is simply gone. Homesickness changes shape under those conditions. It is not only missing a place or a meal, it is knowing that even begging to go home would not work, that physics and launch windows and budgets say, no, not now, maybe not for years. So mental health stops being something handled quietly in a clinic and becomes something the whole society has to build around. Public spaces designed to lower stress, schedules that watch for burnout, a culture that makes it acceptable to say out loud that this is hard. Therapists help, but they are not enough on their own. The layout of the habitat, the shape of the workday, the way conflict gets handled between neighbors sharing one air supply, all of it becomes mental health infrastructure whether anyone planned it that way or not. Leave it unbuilt, and a sealed, high-pressure world will grind people down. Distance is not the only thing that never lets go. Every ordinary task outside a sealed door carries real mortality. Cycling an airlock, walking to a rover, starting a repair on an exposed line, a failed seal, a torn suit, one bad sensor, and someone can be dead in minutes. That fact never fully fades into background noise, so the culture bends around it. A pre-walk checklist stops being paperwork and becomes something closer to a ceremony. Partners stand facing each other. Each item is called out loud: gear, suit integrity, comms, oxygen, scrubbers, and both people watch the other confirm it. Nobody skips a line. Nobody winks past a step to save 2 minutes. The checklist is treated the way people once treated a legal signature or a medical diagnosis. Binding, exact, unskippable. Drills get the same weight, sudden depressurization, a tunnel fire, a rover stored far from any dome, run over and over until the body knows what to do before the mind catches up, because muscle memory decides who lives. And when a team comes back from a genuinely dangerous job, patching a reactor shield, checking an outer tank in storm season, the return itself becomes an event. Small meals, gathered friends, a short public message, not hero worship, a pressure release, and quiet proof that the system still works. Somewhere in all of that, engineering starts to sound like ethics. Asking whether someone followed procedure stops being a technical question and starts being a moral one. Out of that same pressure, new holidays grow, and they stop copying Earth's. A few old dates survive out of habit, but the ones that matter locally are local. The Soul, the first crew landed. The Soul, the first child, drew breath under a third of Earth's gravity. The Soul, a colony, rode out a global storm on its own reserves, with nothing coming from Earth to help. These become the calendar's real anchors, landing day recordings of the original descent replayed each year. A firstborn day honoring the first generation that never knew Earth at all. Storm survival days that retell how power, food, and nerve held through the dark. Even orbital mechanics gets a holiday. At opposition, when the planets swing closest and the signal delay shrinks and the bandwidth opens up, colonies throw link festivals, live calls, streamed events, domes lit for the occasion. And during the long storms, when the sky goes dim and everyone is sealed in together, long night traditions take over, shared meals by low light, storytelling, games, turning a frightening stretch of confinement into something closer to a tradition than an emergency. Even the language starts to drift. Technical words slide into ordinary talk until nobody notices the seam. A soul is just a day. A rad budget is how much risk you have left this month. A bulkhead is any wall between you and trouble. An air minute is what it costs to breathe for 60 seconds. And someone might tell you not to burn your air minutes on an argument that isn't worth it. Say your rad budget is blown, and everyone understands you have used up your risky surface work allowance for the month. Don't vent replaces, don't lose your temper, Because venting air is the one thing a Martian is trained from childhood to fear. A hard seal becomes slang for a promise that will hold. A leak becomes any small problem quietly draining time and attention. Layer decades of a small, mixed population talking through radios and intercoms inside acoustically strange rooms, and a Martian accent forms that belongs to no region of Earth, a sound that marks who grew up here and who is only visiting. But the deepest break is not in the words. It is in what the word home means at all. The first generation of settlers never stops being from Earth. They remember real gravity, open sky, weather nobody manages by committee. Their children do not carry that memory, and their children's children carry it even less. A kid born on Mars grows up in tunnels and domes, steps outside only in a suit, and has never known any gravity but 0.38 g. To that child, Earth is a place in old videos. One gravity nearly 3 times stronger than anything their bones have felt. Oceans of open, unshielded water, a sky described as too blue and too wide to feel safe. School lessons place Valles Marineris and the layered polar ice next to Rome and New York and Beijing. And more, the local landmarks come first. Ask a Mars-born teenager where they're from, and the answer arrives without hesitation. Not a country. Not Earth. I'm Martian. Earth becomes the old world, the place humanity started, not the place that defines them. Something grandparents miss and doctors warn them about in the same breath. Not a colony slowly drifting from its parent world. A different people on a different world, and the gap between them was never going to close. It was only going to grow, one soul, one storm, one generation at a time. That growing gap is not only carried in accents and holidays, it is written into the numbers of how far a body can move, and how rarely, and at what cost. A map of the settlement looks calm, but every meter outside a sealed door is a calculation. Flying would help, except Martian air is too thin and Martian gravity too shallow for rotor blades built to Earth proportions, so a helicopter here needs rotors far larger, or spinning far faster, just to grab lift from that thin carbon dioxide soup. It can be done. A small drone has already done it, but the noise, the complexity, and the maintenance keep flight rare, so most movement still happens on wheels. Pressurized rovers carry you in shirt sleeves through the same air that would kill you the moment you stepped into it, unprotected, cruising at 20 to 40 kilometers an hour, something like 12 to 25 miles an hour. That feels slow next to an Earth highway, but nobody wants highway speeds when a breakdown becomes a life support emergency. And every kilometer of road had to be graded, reinforced, and inspected by hand before anyone drove it. Inside the settlement, small trams thread the tunnels, and electric carts link the domes, built for reliability, not for speed. A vehicle that stalls in a tunnel just means climbing out and walking home. A vehicle that stalls on the open surface leaves nothing standing between an annoying delay and a genuine emergency, except your suit. And the suit is its own small mission. Even a short walk outside the door is not a stroll. Every excursion means putting on hardware that can weigh 30 to 60 kilograms, something like 66 to 130 pounds wrapped around your body, and even under lighter gravity that mass still has to be pushed and stopped with every stride. Inside it, pressure sits a little below what your lungs knew on Earth, oxygen feeds in on a schedule, carbon dioxide gets scrubbed out before it builds up, and the suit fights constantly to hold your temperature steady against an environment that swings hard between light and shadow. Walking a few hundred meters in it feels closer to hiking with a full pack at high altitude than crossing a parking lot. So nobody wanders. Every trip outside gets planned before a boot touches the ground, mapped against exactly how far your oxygen, your battery, and your scrubber cartridge will carry you, with a shelter distance, a turnaround time, and a backup cache built into the route. It looks, from a distance, like driving to a corner store. It is not. A walk 200 meters from an airlock is a planned, logged, life or death expedition, carried out inside a personal spacecraft sized for one. Multiply that same caution across the distance between settlements, and the scale changes completely. 2 outposts, 500 kilometers apart, about 310 miles, covered at a careful 30 kilometers an hour, about 19 miles an hour, add up to more than 16 hours of driving without a single stop. So nobody drives it straight through. The route breaks into stages, each ending at a pre-built shelter or an inflatable way station stocked with its own air, power, and emergency supplies. Vehicles travel in convoys, never alone, carrying spare parts, backup suits, extra fuel, and food for delays nobody can fully plan around. A broken axle, a dead radio, a dust front closing in with a little warning. It plays out like a polar expedition back on Earth, except the rescue teams are smaller, farther away, and slower to reach you. So the people who make these runs are trained crews, mechanics, medics, navigators, system technicians, never passengers along for the view, and every trip gets logged into the settlement's operating history the way a ship's log tracks a voyage. Distance between settlements is only the first layer. The deeper one sits between planets, and there you do not choose the timing at all. Earth and Mars line up for an efficient crossing roughly once every 26 months. When their orbits swing close enough for a ship to make the trip without a punishing fuel cost. Between those windows, the fuel bill turns brutal, or the trip is simply off the table. That 26-month cadence becomes the heartbeat behind every major decision on the planet. New hardware arrives in it, new settlers arrive in it, medical supplies, replacement parts, even new laws and agreements from Earth all arrive in the same pulse. A window year of frequent landings followed by long quiet stretches, where almost nothing new shows up at all, except data. Miss a window, a rocket failure, a funding cut, and the wait is not weeks, not months, more than 2 Earth years for the next chance. So a new reactor or a new dome gets planned across several windows at once, deciding years ahead which launch carries which part, which crew, which specialist. Because there is no fixing it next month when the part you need is locked to a trajectory that has not begun yet. People talk about last window and next window the way Earth people talk about election cycles or school years. Here, a window is not a scheduling detail. It is the unit time itself gets measured in. Even when no ship is moving, information still crosses the gap, just slower than anyone on Earth expects. At the widest point in the orbit, a message can take up to about 22 minutes to arrive one way, the same order of delay that already ruled out any live hearing or real-time vote reaching home. Applied to something as ordinary as a conversation, that lag turns talking into something closer to letter writing. You record, you send, you walk away and do something else, and an answer comes back later, sometimes much later, without your ever knowing how the last one landed. Earth's breaking news is already old by the time it reaches a Martian screen, so entertainment and journalism both shift into staggered streams, watched a little delayed, but with the full arc already attached. There is a strange comfort hidden inside that lag. By the time an argument or a viral moment reaches Mars, the spike, the backlash, and the correction have usually already played out back home, so people here react slower, calmer, once removed from the loudest version of every wave. The whole planet, in a sense, watches the rest of human history through a small, built-in delay. And somewhere inside all that waiting, on the far side of a window nobody controls, the next generation was already arriving, born into a gravity and a radiation load no doctor on Earth had ever charted. That child's chart starts before the child exists. Nobody has ever measured what a human pregnancy does across 9 months carried at barely over 1/3 of Earth's gravity, breathing air held indoors by pumps and seals, under a radiation load Earth's own atmosphere was built to stop. Every normal range a doctor trained on, every growth curve, every textbook chart came from bodies carrying babies at 1 full G under a thick blue sky. None of it was built for this. It is not only a family's private news, it is a live experiment, and the whole clinic treats it that way. Doctors track everything. High-resolution ultrasounds measure bone length in millimeters, head circumference, the curve of a developing spine, fluid volumes, the pattern of blood flow through a placenta learning to work under a lighter pool. Neurological milestones get logged week by week against Earth baselines, and when a measurement runs ahead or behind, the question is never simple. Is this a normal Martian pattern, or an early sign of trouble? Mothers get extra monitoring too, for blood pressure, for clotting, for the way fluid settles differently in a body carrying 1/3 of the weight it evolved under. Where the technology exists, Part of each day might be spent in a rotating room built to fake a heavier gravity through the critical weeks. Where it does not, doctors fall back on positioning and exercise protocols and watch closely for which way the body drifts. The first generation's growth curves end up pinned to a clinic wall, like a chart in a research paper, because that is exactly what they are. Personal and scientific at once. Nobody chose to be the experiment. Every child born here is one anyway. Parents learn to hold both feelings without letting either one win, pride in a healthy scan, and the quiet knowledge that the chart their doctor is comparing it against is still being written in real time, one Martian pregnancy at a time. That child grows up inside 0.38 G, and by most measures grows up healthy. Bones mineralize under a lighter load. Muscles adapt to it. A heart learns to pump against barely a third of the pull that shaped the species. With good exercise, the right diet, and medical support along the way, a Mars-raised body can be strong by every standard the colony measures against. But that standard is locked to Mars. By the teenage years, a trip to the world everyone still calls home is not a flight you book. It is a medical project that can take months to prepare for, strength training, cardiovascular conditioning, monitoring the entire way, and even then a visit can go wrong. Fainting, heart strain, a fall that would bruise an Earth-raised teenager and fracture a Mars-raised one. Many doctors tell Mars-born families the same thing. Don't go unless there is no other choice. A parent explaining this to a child does not talk about distance. They talk about gravity wells, the one their child's body was built for and the one it was not. Home stops being the planet where the species began. It becomes the domes, the tunnels, and the low ground under a child's own feet. Doctors here stop treating a body as a patient alone. They treat it as one component inside the life support system that keeps it running, which means a wearable tracks heart rate, oxygen saturation, carbon dioxide exposure, ambient pressure, skin temperature, logging radiation dose in millisieverts, and sorting it by zone, deep habitat, surface shift, time spent near a reactor during a solar event. A medical file grows into a working history. A doctor does not see a patient with chest pain. He sees a maintenance worker with 40 sieverts logged across specific tissues, 300 logged excursions outside, 10 years spent close to high-energy equipment, and years of nights slept under 2 meters of packed regolith. The treatment that follows is built from that history, not from a generic chart. Radiation-heavy workers get earlier cancer screening and more of it. Low-light, low-activity workers get closer bone scans. On a world this unforgiving, prevention is the only version of medicine that has time to work. Waiting for symptoms is a luxury built for a planet with an atmosphere doing half the job for free. Mars offers no such thing, so the file itself becomes the first warning system, flagging a rising dose or a thinning bone years before either one turns into an emergency. And eventually, in every one of those files, a life ends. On Earth, a body can be buried, or burned, or returned to the ground in a dozen traditions, all of it absorbed by a planet with room to spare. Inside a sealed loop, a body is mass and molecules with nowhere else to go. Even death becomes an engineering question, not a farewell alone. A resource question, a contamination question, a data question, all at once. Autopsies carry more weight than they do on Earth, not only to find a cause, but to read what decades of Martian living actually did to organs, bones, blood vessels, a nervous system built for a different world. Every case adds to the same slow picture, whether the safety margins the colony trusts are actually holding. Disposal itself splits into argument. Cremation burns fuel and oxygen that neither one is free to spend. Burial in regolith runs straight into the rules protecting ground that might still hold Martian life of its own. Some communities turn to high-temperature plasma disposal, reducing a body to basic gases, and a filterable residue that goes back into industrial feedstock. Cold on paper, but framed by the people who choose it as a final contribution to the system that kept them alive. Others reject that outright and fight to keep something quieter for their dead. However it happens, a death still reads as a signal across the whole colony. One fewer person drawing on air and food. A little more margin for everyone left. One more data point in a study that never really ends. Zoom out past any single life, past any single generation, And a stranger pattern starts to show. Centuries of people born and raised at 0.38 G, under a higher radiation load, inside artificial air, and selection does what it always does. People whose hearts handle low gravity well, and can still ramp up hard when needed, tend to do better. Genes that hold bone density under a lighter load get quietly favoured. DNA repair that copes well with chronic radiation spreads a little further each generation than DNA repair that doesn't. Add deliberate gene editing on top of that, families or policies nudging embryos away from known risks, and the drift moves faster still. Nobody wakes up a new species. That is not how any of this works. But lock enough generations into the same gravity, the same radiation, the same manufactured air for long enough, and a branch starts to show its outline. A point somewhere ahead where an Earth human and a Mars human still look the same at a glance, and are no longer simple to mix, medically or otherwise. Homo Martis stops sounding like a name from fiction. It starts sounding like a forecast already partway true. Nothing about it is dramatic in the moment, no single birth marks the line, only a slow accumulation of small statistical advantages, generation folded quietly into generation, until the distance between the two branches is no longer a matter of custom or accent, but of biology itself. And that leaves a harder question sitting underneath the medical one. If Mars is quietly growing its own version of humanity, what does that species owe the ground it grew from, the history buried underneath it, and whatever, if anything, was already living there first? That question does not stay abstract for long, because long before anyone worked out what a new kind of human might owe the ground beneath it, geologists were already treating that ground as something owed enormous care in its own right. Mars is not a blank rock waiting for a colony. It is a crime scene from the early solar system, still holding its evidence, and you are trying to build a home directly on top of it. Orbital images already trace almost 16,000 kilometers, about 10,000 miles, of ancient river channels across the planet, carved paths where water once ran in the open. Enough riverbed, end to end, to stretch across the entire continental United States, more than 3 times over. Add the Dree valleys, the deltas, the layered sediments stacked and undisturbed for billions of years, and drilling into any of it stops being ordinary geology. Each core pulled from a few meters down is a page from a 3 billion year experiment in climate and habitability. Grain size recording how fast water once moved. Mineral chemistry recording what that water carried. Trapped salts and clays recording how long it sat in one place before the world dried out from underneath it. A drill rig on an old riverbed is not construction equipment. It is a surgical instrument. Cutting into a global archive, you get exactly one chance to read correctly. And you are not only reading climate, you are hunting for something that might still be alive, or might have been. Here is where the science turns against itself. Anything that survived on Mars was never going to be sitting on the open surface. It would be hiding in subsurface ice, in brines, pockets of salty water that stay liquid even in brutal cold, in old lakebed sediments sealed away from the sky, exactly the places you most want to sample. But every human near those sites carries trillions of microbes of their own, in the gut, on the skin, packed into every suit joint and seal. A stray leak, an unfiltered vent, a boot print's worth of tracked-in dust, all of it counts as noise in an experiment that cannot tolerate noise. So whole regions get sealed off from people entirely. Sterilized robots do the sampling instead, baked, irradiated, chemically stripped before they ever touch Martian air, engineered to leave behind as little heat and fluid and disturbance as possible. The labs that receive those samples run tighter than any hospital operating room. Double airlocks, filtered exhaust, waste that never touches open ground. You came here partly to look for life. Most days, your actual job is keeping your own life from contaminating the search. That same ground gets fought over twice. Scientists look at a promising crater and want a 100-kilometer buffer around it. No farming, no waste, no drilling except tightly controlled sampling. Settlers look at the same crater and see shallow ice, decent latitude, and the best open ground for a new dome in a decade. Both readings are correct, neither side is wrong. So land use planning on Mars becomes an ongoing negotiation between what you might learn and what you need to survive. Whole regions set aside as planetary parks that produce nothing but data, while a cargo shortfall or a population spike puts pressure on every line drawn around them. Loosen the boundary and you risk the sample. Hold the boundary and the colony stays cramped. Either choice gets made by people who also decide in the same meeting where their own children will grow up. Terraforming was supposed to be the clean answer to all of this, and then biology got involved. If anything is still alive in that Martian subsurface, warming the planet and thickening its air does not have one effect. It could wake an ecosystem that has been sealed in ice and rock for longer than anything has been alive on Earth, or it could kill it outright, drowned in oxygen it never evolved to handle, poisoned by chemistry its metabolism was never built to survive. The question stops being whether Mars can be made more like Earth. The real question is harder. Do you have the right to overwrite a native biosphere, even one made of microbes nobody will ever see with their own eyes? Some argue that any independent origin of life outweighs any single colony's convenience. Others argue that billions of people needing a second stable world outweigh microbes no one can point to. Compromises exist on paper, warm some regions, thicken some air, wall off the sites most likely to hold something alive. But Mars has no clean borders. Heat moves, dust moves. Carbon dioxide released at one pole shows up at the other months later. And the hardest part is not choosing. It is choosing without knowing. Wait centuries for certainty, and you tell generations of children they can never breathe outside without a helmet. Move fast, and you gamble with a biosphere that may be older than anything Earth has ever produced. Mars has already run this experiment once, on itself, without asking anyone's permission. Billions of years ago, the core cooled. The global magnetic field weakened, then failed. With nothing left to deflect it, the solar wind stripped the atmosphere away, one molecule at a time, while fading volcanic activity stopped replacing what was lost. Over hundreds of millions of years, pressure fell, oceans boiled off or froze into the ground, and the surface settled into the cold, dry, radiation-scoured place you now stand on. You can read that entire collapse in isotope ratios, in rock chemistry at different depths, in patterns of erosion nobody wrote down at the time. It is not a warning that Earth will end the same way. The two planets are too different for that. It is something quieter and more useful, a record of exactly what a world looks like on the far side of losing its atmosphere, how long the damage takes to set in, and how impossible it becomes to reverse. Ground stations and orbiting instruments keep that record running, logging solar activity, dust, ground ice, radiation, year after Martian year, feeding data back to Earth that no laboratory on that planet could ever produce on its own. So by the time anyone seriously proposes changing the Martian atmosphere again, on purpose this time, the choice sitting on the table is not really about engineering. It is about whether to protect one ancient, unfinished experiment in planetary history, or start a second one, with your own species now standing on both sides of it, subject and designer at once. Say the choice lands on starting that second experiment. The dream that follows always takes the same shape. Remake the whole planet, turn red dust into blue water and green fields. Hand your grandchildren an open sky they can breathe without a helmet. How hard could it really be? The numbers do not cooperate. Getting the air here up to something like Earth sea level pressure, 100 kilopascals, close to what your lungs already expect, does not mean releasing a large amount of gas. It means releasing or importing trillions of tons of it, not the output of a mine or a fleet of rockets, but the mass of thousands of mountains, turned to vapor and pushed into the sky. There are only two ways to find that much gas. You heat the polar caps and the carbon dioxide frozen underneath them until it vents on its own, season after season, for longer than any government on Earth has ever stayed in power. Or you drag icy bodies in from the outer solar system and crash them into the planet on purpose, one after another, for as long as it takes, each impact a controlled catastrophe aimed at a target that cannot move. Even the most optimistic studies, built on the best imaginable technology and perfect cooperation between nations that rarely cooperate on anything, still talk about centuries of continuous industrial work. And the power behind it dwarfs anything humanity generates today. Not gigawatts, terawatts, stacked for decades, 1,000 of the largest reactors ever built running without pause, belts of them, continent-sized solar farms, mirrors in orbit, Factories tearing rock and ice apart around the clock. A single company cannot run that. A single nation cannot run that. It takes multiple civilizations, aligned across generations who will never meet each other, and even then, nobody can promise the atmosphere settles into something stable once you finally stop steering it. The quick dream is dead. It died on the numbers before it ever reached the sky. So the planners quietly changed the question. Not how do you turn the whole planet into a second Earth, but how much can you actually change, and where, and still keep it under control? That question has an answer, and it is smaller and stranger than the dream. You do not fix the sky, you cover pieces of ground, giant pressure roofs, membranes or rigid shells spanning kilometers, in the biggest plans tens of kilometers across, wider than most cities, hold in warmth, pressure and water. The open air never will. From orbit, Mars still looks the same, red and empty and silent. On the ground, under one of those roofs, you are standing in a long corridor of engineered climate, plants in open beds, hardy grasses on ground that was never meant to hold them, water moving instead of frozen. At the same time, you work the whole atmosphere too, but modestly, doubling or tripling what is there now, region by region, decade by decade. You will not reach the pressure your body was built for. You will reach a few kilopascals of gas that still will not let you breathe unprotected, but that thins the gap your walls and suits have to fight every hour of every soul. Outside, that means trading the full pressure suit, the miniature spacecraft strapped to your back, for something closer to heavy cold weather clothing, a hard helmet, a respirator. Still not safe to remove, far less likely to kill you the moment it fails, and a torn glove stops being a death sentence and starts being an injury. Life does not change here in one switch flip. It changes in kilopascals, patch by patch, valley by valley. Not a blue marble, habitable ground, punched into a hostile planet, one engineered patch at a time. While the ground gets tuned, so do you. Habitats were built to fit humans first. Then the arrow turns. Humans start being built to fit the habitat. Gene edits strengthen the DNA repair your cells lean on under chronic radiation. Others slow how fast 038G hollows out bone, tuning metabolism the way earlier settlers once tuned regolith and water. Engineered microbes, seeded into the gut, learn to run on recycled water and Martian crops your grandparents never ate. Technology stacks on top of the biology, implants that steady blood pressure through every pressure change, sensors wired close enough to the nervous system that you feel a radiation spike or a thinning air mix the way you now feel a change in temperature, before any alarm has to tell you. Nobody signed up to test any of this on themselves. Every Mars-raised body carries the results anyway. 2 generations from now, human on Mars and human on Earth are not quite describing the same body. Neither is more human than the other. The category is just wider than it used to be, and it stretches hardest here, because here the environment leaves no other choice. None of this keeps Mars a remote outpost for long. A ship burns less fuel leaving here than leaving Earth, the gravity well shallower, so the planet becomes a forward base for everywhere past it. The asteroid belt, Ceres, Phobos and Deimos, the ice-rich moons out past Jupiter. Metal and volatile ice move inward from the belt. Advanced parts move outward from Earth. Martian ships and Martian crews, already built for distance and delay, end up carrying more of that traffic than anyone on Earth originally planned for. Research done in a Martian lab quietly shapes the next habitat built on Europa or in open space, and the habits Mars had to learn early, patience with long delays, comfort with harsh trade-offs, redundancy built into everything, become the template everyone else uses once they are far enough from rescue. Earth keeps the largest population and the deepest roots. Mars carries the sharpest edge of what it takes to survive somewhere that was never built for you. Call a place like that a colony, and the word stops fitting. Colonies ask permission. This does not. It is a peer, with its own interests and its own say in how the whole species spends its risk. And that is where the real split sits, underneath the pressure numbers and the gene edits and the shipping lanes. 2 origin stories, not one. The first begins on Earth, savannas and oceans and open sky, A body shaped by a single gravity, seasons, cities, the long climb into space. Mars just one more chapter in a story that already had 1,000 chapters before it. The second begins here. Regolith and domes and tunnels and dust. The first landing. The first greenhouse. The first child who grew up under a third of Earth's weight and never once looked at a sky that was safe to breathe. That second story does not treat Earth as home. It treats Earth as the place the story started before it moved. Children raised inside it grow up with their own heroes and their own founding arguments, their own disasters, and their own quiet victories. And when they say we, they mean Martians first, humans second. They have proof, standing under their own feet, that a single planet was never the limit on where a person could belong. Whether either story ever fully closes, whether Mars settles into something stable, or keeps drifting the way it always has, nobody standing here today can say for certain. What is already certain is smaller and harder to walk back. Once a species has rooted itself in two places, under two different skies, at two different weights, the claim that it could do this a third time, and a fourth, stops sounding like a dream, and starts sounding like something that was always going to happen next.